Hi, good evening. It's really nice to see so many of you. Welcome to PoSoCoMeS online seminar. This is our last seminar this semester, but join us next semester as well. And today we're discussing the book called "The Past Can't Heal Us: The Dangers of Mandating Memory in the Name of Human Rights." I'll briefly present the book, and I will briefly present the author of the book and the discussant, and then I'll transfer the microphone to them. So in this book, Lea David, who is the author of the book, critically investigates the relationship between human rights and memory, suggesting that instead of understanding human rights in a normative fashion, human rights should be treated as an ideology. Conceptualizing human rights as an ideology gives us useful theoretical and methodological tools to recognize the real impact human rights has on the ground. Lea David traces the rise of the global phenomenon that is the human rights memorialization agenda, termed moral remembrance, and explores what happens once this agenda becomes implemented. Based on evidence from the Western Balkans and Israel-Palestine, she argues that the human rights memorialization agenda does not lead to a better appreciation of human rights, but contrary to what would be expected, it merely serves to strengthen national sentiments, divisions, and animosities along ethnic lines, and leads to the new forms of social inequalities that are closely connected to different forms of corruptions. So this is the book that we are discussing today. And now briefly about the author and the discussant. In the screen, you can see Lea David, who is the author, and she's an assistant professor at the School of Sociology, University College Dublin. Her work examines the globalization of human rights and memory politics and their impact on nationalist ideologies in conflict settings. Her main research and teaching interests cover the interconnectedness of sociology of human rights and memory politics, nationalism and nation-state, human-object relations, ideology, solidarity, historical sociology, qualitative research methods, the Holocaust-genocide nexus, the Balkan and the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. She has held various postdoc fellowships, including a fellowship in Holocaust Studies, the Fulbright Fellowship, the prestigious Jonathan Shafira Fellowship at Tel Aviv University, the Israeli Council Fellowship for Islamic Scholars, and the Marie Curie Research Fellowship at the School of Sociology of University College Dublin. And this discussant today is Gruia Bădescu, who is a research fellow at the Zukunftskolleg University of Constance. He holds a PhD from the University of Cambridge and was a lecturer and a research associate at the University of Oxford. In 2018, he joined Constance as a Balkan Prize and Alexander von Humboldt Fellow, hosted by Jan and Aleida Assmann. Since 2020, he leads a research group on urban imaginaries after political ruptures at the Zukunftskolleg, investigating the reshaping of cities and narratives in the aftermath of war and dictatorship. One focus of his research is post-war reconstruction in cities and dealing with the past, having done fieldwork in the former Yugoslavia and the Middle East. A second area of research is the memory of authoritarian regimes in Central and Eastern Europe and South America, examined through comparisons and entanglements. So we will proceed with 20 minutes of presentation, 20 minutes of discussion, and then we will open the screen or chat, as you wish, for your questions. Everyone's really welcome and encouraged to join our discussion. So Lea, Gruia, screen and microphone is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this invitation, and thank you for all of you for being here. Okay, first to say, I have a terrible allergy, so I'm coughing all the time. I hope I will going to pull this through a presentation, and if I start coughing, I apologize. It is kind of, we finished the semester, so I appreciate you coming here, but I would suggest, because this is such a small forum of colleagues and peers to make it less formal and maybe more active. So I would suggest, if you want, I mean, you can just raise your hand, and whenever you feel that you want to get in and ask a question, you're very well invited to do so. I'm not going to talk 20 minutes. I'm going to briefly address the main issues in this book. But I think, wait, I will share my very, very short presentation just for you to have something to look at apart from my face. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Do you see like one, or is it like, is it a big screen, one slide?
Yes.
Big screen.
Okay. Okay. So the book came out in 2020, and at the time, I thought it was, in a way, the book went in many ways against the stream, and it was against what was there in the scholarship, against what is there in a policy agenda, and it was in a bit, it was in a way kind of, it gave a very strike critique of what is happening. But now we are in 2024, and so many things happened, and now I feel when I talk about this book that it is very mild. I mean that many things happened since then, and I think that this book was in a way very correct in its main arguments, but we are much, much, much worse than we were in 2020. So that is my point here. That's why I would like maybe to connect and reflect to other things that are happening today, to see how actually we can, not talk about book as it is a living thing in not just in a research, but in a reality, in what is happening, and what can we, how can we use it today. So the main focus of the book was to trace what I call the human rights memorialization agenda. And this type of memory I call memory remembrance. So it is historical sociological study where I try to understand actually historical processes that led to what I think is currently the main paradigm through which we understand memory. And this is this moral remembrance. So I tried, first of all, in the first part of the book, I tried to understand those processes. How, simply put, how come that we ended here, being in this particular moment, that we all feel like this is how we should remember past atrocities, regardless of what kind of atrocities we are talking about, whether we are talking about slavery or colonialism or genocide or mass crime, it doesn't matter. So that was an attempt to show how very different historical legacies were put together, and how we ended up having this, again, what they call moral remembrance as the main input from the human rights memorialization agenda. So first of all, what is this concept of moral remembrance? It is, first of all, standardized set of norms based on human rights values. So it is important to address that the root of what we see today is actually in human rights. I will not bother you with historical processes and how human rights actually came into this area of memory, which is not in a way a natural place for human rights to deal with. But today we see, and this process started maybe 30 years ago, we see that there is a really direct link between human rights and the memorialization agenda. Not only that human rights is very much invested in the ways in which countries should remember past atrocities. So we are talking about this generative process of standardization of memory at the global world level. So I stress here global world level because it is different than how we actually imagine or use memory at the nation state level. Nationalism and human rights in that sense are competing ideologies that have different sources of power, and hence they have different mechanisms through which they actually promote those agendas. So, if we talk about nation state and we talk about nationalism, of course, we know about, all these, all those sets of nation state sponsored memorization projects, whether we are talking about national calendars or we are talking about textbooks, museums, monuments, you name it, all those things are top down and they're there to enforce certain particular way in which different nations are supposed to remember past atrocities. Well, it is different when we talk about moral remembrance because the source is in a global level, so it is above nation state. Moral remembrance defines the proper ways in which societies are supposed to deal with the legacies of mass human rights abuses. So again, stresses mass human rights abuses and on the ways in which societies are supposed to remember it. Again, there is whole historical process, how actually human rights activists, especially in the third wave, got into this sense of it is not enough to shame and blame different societies. There has to be some kind of toolkit to provide different activists and human rights lawyers and, to actually embrace something that should happen in different states that have legacies of mass human rights abuses. And the guiding principle is to force states to face and become accountable for the past human rights abuses. So this is main idea that has to do with the historical development of moral remembrance. Now, moral remembrance as the human rights memorialization agenda is grounded in the most basic presumptions in human rights and transitional justice. So those three presumptions you're all familiar with because many of us do our research / activism through those prisms. And this is what I try to show in a book, how some presumptions we take for granted, although they are not proven in reality. So first is that proper memorization is essential for healing societies with a difficult past and moving beyond trauma and violence. Everyone knows that. You will see that in every single discourse, whether we are talking about NGOs that are dealing with human rights and memory or states and societies, this idea that we need to heal societies. Big part of my book, I try to actually refute this and to show that there is no such a thing as healing societies, that societies are not people, that they actually move through, they have different pace, they have different mechanism, and that this is, kind of export of different vocabulary that comes from this particular, from psychology and especially psychoanalysis that was again adopted in the 60s and later on developed into social practices and policies, but actually has nothing to do with reality. And we don't see actually research that shows that there is such a thing as healing societies. So it is more about this wishful thinking. This proper memorialization is understood to be a crucial step in establishing moral responsibility for past atrocities. So this is idea again, that it's not just to remember something, there is a proper way to do something. So it is very normative. It means, in fact, that you come to people who were fighting in different wars and you're actually prescribing different forms of memory, saying, no, you were the bad guys or you were the good guys. This is how you need to remember this. So it is very, very normative, yet it is very contested. Then proper memorization can guarantee the establishment of human rights values and can bring to reconciliation. So this idea that, if we do A, B, C, we do proper memorization, we will end up having human rights values. So as you will see, that is probably the most important argument that I had in my book, that actually we don't see that happening. So questions I was asking in my book is why we think the way we think about memorization. In a way, how come that whether I'm going to now research the Balkans or Cambodia or, I don't know, Canada, I will see that people are asking the same questions. I will see that funds that are being given for NGOs are very similar. I will see that they have all the same discourses. How it is possible that we are actually, what is happening historically and sociologically speaking, that we end up having this grand narrative. Second thing is, does moral remembrance have the potential to transform individuals in local communities into believers in human rights, values, and norms? If that is the case, that moral remembrance, meaning the proper way to remember the past, is the path or guarantee that we will actually end up as a society more prone to human rights, so that is wonderful. But I really wanted to check, is that happening at the end of the day? You know, so if we talk about macro, meso, and micro levels, how those ideas of moral remembrance are being are traveling from different levels, you know, of course, they're in each level, they're being filtered through different organizations, through nation state, to NGOs, you know. So what comes at the end of the day, you know, to, so to say, ordinary people do after they go through those processes of embracing moral remembrance? Do they actually become more prone human rights? And of course, the sad truth is that is not the case. And what are some side effects of moral remembrance produced on the ground? And finally, my major 4 claims. First is that moral remembrance clashes with the nation state-sponsored memorialization agenda. So you understand, because if human rights as an ideology has this source in a global polity, it means it is above nation state. It has to be adopted and filtered by the state to be actually adopted in any national setting. But the way in which moral remembrance is going to be adopted is always a function how much actually nation state is willing to adopt it, and where it finds it beneficial for itself. So you will see many different contexts that, you know, maybe nominally nation states are going to adopt certain parts of it, but then certain parts of it, they're going to filter it away. Second thing, that moral remembrance strengthens the category of nation ethnicity. This, of course, needs a bit longer discussion, which I will not go into it right now. But the idea is that if you look into those practices that were developed through this toolkit of moral remembrance, you will see that the ethnicity, religion, nation still stay as the main reference point of anyone's identity. I'll take just one example. If we talk about public official apologies, so, you know, a president needs to go to apologize for the whatever, it doesn't matter, you know, you can take any context that you want, for the crimes that were done in the name of its own nation. So it is taking, again, people and putting them, characterizing them under this umbrella of nation. So someone apologized in my name because I am, I don't know, Canadian, Serbian, Israeli, it doesn't matter. So this, again, brings back nation as the main point of reference. Then moral remembrance produces new social inequalities, because how it works at the bottom-up level, we actually see that all those who suffered actually those human rights abuses will be directly impacted by day-to-day politics. So, you know, they will seek, for example, to get this victimhood status from different NGOs, so through which they can actually claim this victimhood status from their own nation states. And then you see how actually you have politics, day-to-day politics, where those victims and survivors are being offered all kinds of trades and benefits. For example, okay, you will be able to access those budgets, but actually in return, you need to promise that you're going to vote for this political party. So, you know, when it goes when you see at bottom-up level, many different things are happening that actually you see that those who are not willing to be in this role to claim themselves as pure ideal victims are going to be marginalized. So you have new ways in which this idea of victimhood is being is producing different hierarchies. And finally, moral remembrance does not make people more appreciative of human rights. And this is, of course, probably the most problematic and depressive point of this book, because at the end of the day, after this immense, tremendous effort to bring, actually, to understand, to bring back to societies and to reflect the crimes that were committed in their name or by them, actually, you see that even different groups will always ask benefits for themselves in the name of human rights, but will never fight for benefits of other groups in the, in the name of human rights. So you see that actually it always goes back to who gets what in the end. I think I will finish here, and we can talk after this a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Lea. Gruia, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Lea, for this presentation, and particularly for the thought-provoking book. And I don't know if people in the Zoom room have read it, but it's really a treat to read and to think through. And I thought of just starting by mentioning my own positionality. How do I approach this book? So I research, as Gile mentioned, post-dictatorship and post-war societies, and I was just recently in Argentina. So I wanted to start with that Lea mentioned how many things have happened in the last 4 years. So in Argentina, one of the champions of this memory regime, and particularly the human rights framework that Lea describes, and again, in Latin America, memory and human rights are basically in one concept. Argentina went through elections last year, and Javier Milei was voted. In case you don't know, Javier Milei is a libertarian, but more interestingly for us, he named the vice president that was actually quite involved with the former dictatorship, was bringing food to Videla, the dictator in prison, very warm and towards the dictatorship, and also with the intention to erase a lot of the, let's say, established and already rigid framework of the memory of the last military dictatorship, which Argentina had between 76 and 83. And again, while in Europe we talk a lot about Germany as kind of the framework of dealing with the past that was exported, Argentina, without doubt, is one of the most important models of truth and justice that was exported elsewhere, was inspiration. Well, the last few months in Argentina, speaking to various interlocutors whom I had met throughout the years, with heads of sites of memory, some UNESCO World Heritage sites like the ESMA, with the directors of museums, with people involved in many memory projects, they were all shocked. And they were shocked because they said many people who went through the programs, the educational programs that happen in these sites, with young people learning about human rights through the memory of the Argentine dictatorship, through the disappeared, through the tortures, many of these people voted for Milei. So they confessed in a way with shame, but also in a secretive form, saying that it had nothing to be talked about, that it failed. All the memory politics and policies, sorry, that were shaped in the last decades have failed. How can people who go through these trainings vote for Milei? How can, in Latin America, when Brazilians say, we voted for Bolsonaro because we did not engage with memory of dictatorship. But then Brazilians themselves were shocked that Argentines did. What happened? Maybe the most important voice in Latin America on dealing with memory, Elizabeth Gelin, she said, La memoria no garantiza nada. Memory does not guarantee anything. So this is actually vindicating the claims that Lea put in, which received a lot of attention, but also a lot of discomfort. If now we talk about a champion of dealing with the past, Argentina, looking inside and seeing that these policies have failed, if in Germany dealing with the past has become, and I know I'm recorded, but it became a rigid and rather a frame in which one cannot speak about certain things. What is happening? What is happening if the two champions, let's say, if I can call it like that, have shown us in 2023, 2024 that things are not okay in the memory world? So I want now to go to another part of my positionality and my curiosity, how I got to this in the first place. So I'm interested in, when I started being interested in the question of dealing with the past through cities and through the reconstruction of cities. Through the question that I was curious if the architects and planners after wars had, either in post-war Germany or in 1990s Serbia or Bosnia or 1940s Yugoslavia. Did they think about dealing with the past, whatever that means? Did they embrace, in any case, the Adornian call that we cannot move forward if we don't engage with the past? And I have to confess that throughout my work, I was looking at this normative question, because architecture and planning, as law, are normative disciplines. And I was disappointed to see that the majority did not think that they needed to engage with the past. And that, in fact, the argument that came forward in my work is not intentionality, but the consequence of their acts that was important. So I was somehow, I confess, I was honestly disappointed. I argued for different models of actually engagement with the past in the way that reconstruction happens. And then I went to Latin America. I spent the last almost 10 years dealing with dictatorship. And I saw how actually dealing directly in the professions I was interested in, but also in the general society with memory backfired. The obsession with memory created somehow a form of rigid remembrance, of not touching, of creating categories such as the victim, as Lea just said, which are somehow ossified. So now I want to go back to this initial interest in looking at architects as people who are looking at transitional justice and looking to the legal profession. What does it mean when you are working within normative disciplines, law, planning, architecture, that operate with what is to be done? What is the best practice? And what I really like is how Lea started the book by saying, okay, this is a sociological work. And I would actually say that what she argues, without saying this, is the duty to critique. So I would add another duty, to what she said. The duty to critique that social sciences have. She says we have not actually examined how efficient is not a good word, but how well put together were all these policies. How did they actually? How did they measure? So such sociological critique actually can moderate approaches and curb the enthusiasm. But it's an important way not to cancel, not to substitute the questions of dealing with this in practice, but to actually provide evidence-based policy critique that can impact this policy. The big question that I have for Lea now is, after this book and after also different events that have happened, so what is the fine line? What is the threshold for you? Is everything to be thrown away, or are there things that we can keep from this moral remembrance regime? So this is, let's say, the big question I start this discussion with. I have to underline that Lea David does not want to throw away human rights. She says, and it's important for me to quote that she says human rights as an ideology is by far the best ideal or ideology to strive for. What she wants to look into to see how this functions, how it's constructed. And when she talks about ideology, she does not look in the Marxist and post-Marxist way of ideology as something that is to be dismantled and criticized, but as a mechanism. And she does so inspired by Mareshevich's treatment of nationalism. She already mentioned in the presentation the different elements of moral remembrance at a global level. I'm not going to go into this, but I want to focus a bit on what she meant by new social inequalities, by focusing on the status of a victim. So this is very important. And I think looking at victim and victimhood is key and it's high time. Of course, we have been hearing a lot for a decade already of competitive victimhood, but in the way that Lea constructs the argument, in the way that she looks at our anthropologists like Malkin and purification, the idea of the pure victim, of the idea of extension of victimhood, how basically all Jews become victims in this narrative and not only Holocaust survivors, or the idea of overwhelming victim identities. And she gives a very interesting case in a footnote. So you check the footnotes, they're also great. For instance, she gives the example of rape victims, and Nena Mochni's work on with rape victims, and one interlocutor who got married but was too ashamed to talk about her marriage because that would have somehow undermined her social role as a victim who has to speak about being a traumatized person. How can he get married? Then also about technocracies of remembrance, and the example of IRA as a technocratic way to remember Holocaust, and look at how is that impacting Germany today. And I want to bring here also, going back to the Latin American case, is that sometimes victimhood becomes even more as a form of, more than a form of legitimacy. In sites of memory, in the place I was working with, only descendants have the moral right to work in these sites, to volunteer. The others are questioned. What are you doing here if you did not lose anyone? What happens when victimhood, even beyond ethnicity, becomes a category of exclusion? Because what's interesting, in the book, the discussion is focused on differences which are ethno-national, religious, linguistic. What do we do when these differences are actually about the status of a victim, which can be a political victim without difference in ethnicity? So like the case of the disappeared, like the case of various authoritarian regimes, victims of authoritarian regimes. I find maybe the most sobering and the most important conclusion is of Lea's work, the highly interesting study of impact of these encounter groups who meet. They're supposed to discover one another. It's Palestinians and Israelis in the 1990s. That's one of the focus points of the research, or post-Dayton, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia. And what the conclusion is that basically people, after being together with for days, she doesn't look at one-day events, but at long durée, let's say, not that durée, but longer engagements. She finds that there's a self-identification with the group by either feeling like being a victim or being guilty, and that actually makes you go back to the group and really focusing on that identity. And also, one key problem here is the reductionism to one event. Srebrenica is the event that will be remembered for the Bosniaks, Jasenovac for the Serbs, the Nakba, the Holocaust, and these reduce everything. So this idea of reductionism and self-identification is very important to see how basically the micro-solidarity feeling in these meetings of young people, for instance, feeling beyond their identities and looking at other understandings of human rights is failing. But I have a question here. What do you make of the initiatives that create that want to shape an attitude towards human rights in general? To give an example, in Kragujevac, Serbia, there are NGOs that are working with young people, high school students and people in their early 20s, talking about the massacre. And for those who don't know, there was a Nazi massacre of Serbs. Basically, they killed 100 Serbs for each German soldier who was killed. So this is a very important part of the local memory. But these organizations are working with that to create an understanding of human rights, to position themselves to today. So the aim, and discussing with the people working there, is that they will have somehow more sympathetic views towards Albanians or towards people, towards, I don't know, Croats. So how do you make when this is actually about human rights in general, as opposed to dealing with a particular conflict? Or if you look at Germany, Aleida Assmann's and others' argument that dealing with the past is about taking a stance to the present, to the injustice and the violence of the present. So how do we make of this, in which these initiatives are going somehow in a universalistic understanding of human rights, as opposed to creating empathy in a particular group situation. Also, in Lea's discussion of cases, we've heard about Israel-Palestine and ex-Yugoslav context, and what she underlines, it's very important that we're dealing here with people who otherwise did not mix for decades, and even less so now, particularly now in Israel-Palestine. While in the ex-Yugoslav case, it's people who have lived together, and they, for various reasons, reason of war, situation changed, but they have this common past. And you talk about the importance of the Franco-German model of reconciliation, how that's actually important to deal with that, as opposed to the Spanish, which means to move on, to forget. And also, I wanted to underline talking about taboos, how in these meetings, people would not speak about the crimes of others. They will just talk about the crimes of themselves, in the case of Yugoslavia. And another taboo, the big taboo in the meetings between Israelis and Palestinians in the 90s, was to do comparisons, a taboo which exists today in places like Germany. Of course, after October 7th, we are living in a different world in which these narratives are become even more exacerbated about, the cause that rallies the global South, what's happening in Palestine, but also for Israel, the Hamas attack, seen as the highest level of violence after the Holocaust, is linked with pogroms, anti-Semitic violence, not accommodating any concern for suffering in Gaza. While for Palestine in the colonial world, this is kind of reiterating the special place of Palestine in the discourse. Now I want to move towards the methods, and you use transcripts to have a global view of what's happening, but also mention at some point that you did not choose an ethnographic method or Garfinkel-like methodology. And I'm curious if you can tell us a bit more, what do you expect you would have found if you had used such ethnographic engagement? What is the difference? Also, I'm thinking about generations, and to what extent generations play a role in how people behave in these groups. To what extent did you consider that in the work? Also, in terms of these categories, I'm thinking of Anna Mijić's work on associative strategies. And I wonder what you found in this work, the idea of self-victimization beyond ethnic boundaries. So for instance, in Mijić's work, she talks about the subjectification of war, that people in the former Yugoslavia would can somehow bond in particular context, saying, when the war came upon us, the war as an external actor, as someone who came upon us, which somehow goes beyond this ethnic boundaries and creates a common ground. Or it can be externalization of guilt. You have two identities against a third. The third is the guilty one when people speak, or even silencing of war. We did not even care about war. To what extent did you find that to appear? Finally, I want to get to other explanatory models for what you write, and how do you make sense of them? So this is the last big question, with a couple of sub-questions. So how do you explain the relative success of the German-French dialogues versus the ones you mentioned? Because we talk that they seem to have worked, at least in the way that French and German see each other today. Why is it different? And then comes the big question, which is a question that a historian will ask a sociologist, a structure agency question. What about the role of the context, the external events and agencies? So you make the argument that dialogues, Israel-Palestine didn't really work in the 90s because of the way that this is set up. But you also underline how Netanyahu cut in 1996 the budget of these, how in 2002 the wall is inaugurated. So to what extent are these events, the wall, and then different legislation, and the Israelis cannot go in anymore for already a while now into the West Bank. To what extent does that play? To what extent are these events undermining or sabotaging the micro solidarity building dialogues that you discuss? Also, to what extent are factors such as language use, and you talk about the use of Hebrew in these great power and hierarchy, can show a difference rather than the Franco-German, which I'm not sure how they work, but maybe you know what the language is used. And then the instrumentalization of NGOs in the Balkans. If we look at NGOs as kind of mechanisms of receiving money, of survival, basically, for many, and you talk about thousands of NGOs appearing in Croatia and Serbia and Bosnia, they are instrumental. They get money, and so maybe is that a reason also why these initiatives did not work? Okay, now the final thing, alternatives. You discuss at the end silence as coexistence. You invoke Margaret Selinovic's work or Karol Kidron's and talk about silence. Maybe silence is the way, or In Praise of Forgetting, David Reeve. I'm curious then, and the final question is, what else came in the meantime? Your thinking in the last years, what alternatives do you see to this powerful ideology that you described? So with this, I'm thanking you very much, and I will pray forward to the answers, but also to the broader discussion.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe before we start opening, I will. I mean, Gruia, you're always brilliant. I really thank you for all those comments, even those difficult ones that I'll try to address briefly. So I'll start from easy. Okay, easy stuff, and then I will go to more and more difficult. We'll start from methodology. Yes, I mean, I made this very conscious choice not to do ethnography because I wanted to do something that is macro sociology. So it was, if I go into the field and go on and do case studies, then it is all about nuances and differences, and how do I compare that and that. I need it time-wise, budget-wise. I didn't want that. I didn't want to have that kind of voice. I want to see actually this picture, how things go from bottom, from a top down, what stays there. I'm certain that I would be getting much more nuanced picture if I would do ethnography. And that is one of the things that I was attacked for, that I was not, that there is overgeneralization. And yes, it is in many ways, there is, but that's sort of sociology that I wanted to have in this book. So it is not, again, I understand that different NGOs have different stories, and there are also stories of success, and but this is, again, I wanted to show sociologically certain things that I was interested in. So of course that I omitted also many other things. That goes to as well to agency and context, and I could not bring context for every different case study that I was like small case study that was addressing there. Again, because that was not the part of this book, and I didn't want to bring, to make this book into a jungle, but just to try to keep it, to maintain the main idea. So again, we can talk about budgets and we can talk about other external things that happened. But at the end of the day, I think that it would not, I mean, with all those variations and nuances, the effect is the same. Whether we are talking about those dialogue groups that are happening in the Balkans, Israel, Palestine, with the Turks and Armenians, with whatever, you always end up having this. It has to do with a very particular structure of those dialogue groups that are balance-based, so you need to have the same number of participants from different sides, which means to start with their assigned roles. So, they just internalize those roles through this project. Now, German-France dialogue, it was important because it became kind of a template. It was also why it was successful. Again, how do you measure success? That is another question, but it was a side effect of much bigger financial deals that Germany and France had. So it was like, we need to go back to business. We need to go back to, working together. And this was just a kind of appendix to it. So in that sense, it was, now we celebrate it as something very, very important, but it was just something that didn't start as important as we see it today. Now to more. Okay, you're correct that there are other forms of identification, but they're hijacked. For example, it is interesting to see that in this moral remembrance, human rights memorialization agenda, you don't get to see class at all. Class disappeared completely. Profession, gender, local versus global or national, all those things are happening, are there, but they have no attention. There is no focus on them. It is interesting to see, for example, as time passes by with the Balkans, you will find that there is more solidarity in a way between veterans from different groups, ethnic groups, than Serbian veterans and Serbian ordinary people. So you see some things are happening there, but there will never have spotlight. So you will never hear those stories. You will never be able to actually locate some other kinds of identities because they're very much pushed again under the carpet. Now to go to your bigger questions, I think about human rights and other, projects such as Holocaust and other projects that are trying, what you mentioned, Kragujevec, that they are trying actually to implement this idea of human rights. First of all, to be sure, most of those projects are trying to do that under different pretense, with different, projects, because the funding is actually is obliging them. They are saying that you need to connect this to human rights because that is the end result they want to see. What is happening there? And I think this is crucial. I didn't talk about it, but and others also know that how Holocaust became kind of measurement of human rights. And through this historical process, especially in the 90s, in the States, it became equated to human rights. If you talk about Holocaust remembrance, you're actually talking about human rights. And the whole Holocaust event or events were understood through the lenses of human rights, which we say, it is amazing. This is so important because it is all about education. This is how you connect past and present and future. You want to actually provide this kind of message to young or old, it doesn't matter, to other people and audiences. But what is happening there is that you actually break this link between Holocaust as a real contextual event, and you manage to actually elevate it to a level of something that is very universal and abstract. What is being lost in this whole process is simply complexity, is the messiness that not in like in any other war, you don't have such a thing as pure victim. You don't have, people have different stories, different contexts. Even those who were killed, and I know it sounds as a blasphemy, but even those who were killed, not at all points were victims in that is, I mean, I don't know that for sure, but we know human nature. So probably in some other context before that, maybe they were, on the other side. So, the biggest thing, and here I'm coming to those big questions that you asked about alternatives and about inequality and who has the right to talk. The biggest thing for me that this human rights memorialization agenda actually did this very, I think, damaging division to victims, perpetrators, and bystanders. And everything we understand today in those conflicts, we see it through these metrics. And this is very, very problematic because you immediately, it is not even connected to people, individuals, but it is connected to peoples. So you connect, victims are, I don't know, Bosniak, Serbs, Palestinians, Israel, it doesn't matter. So you connect it to that category, to nationality or ethnicity, which again, just perpetrates the whole idea of nationalism. Now, because it was embedded in such a way that, for example, everyone that has every Jew is actually connected to Holocaust. Whether it doesn't matter where they live, if they're actually connected to Holocaust, they're all subsumed under this category of victim. Now, victim became such a power card, and it became like victim is a new hero. So now you can see it in other wars. I mean, if we can talk about Israel and Gaza, you see how the main struggle is actually to gain this victimhood card. And I apologize, I don't mean to be insensitive to what is happening there. I'm talking here very sociologically in that sense, but we are going to see something extraordinary. And especially because, you know, what is happening now that Israel is linked to Holocaust and managed to have 50 years of promoting this victimhood both internally and externally. And now, you know, they're losing complete legitimacy. But it's not that Israel is only losing legitimacy, but also Holocaust as an event, because it was understood as something that is abstract and connected to, you know, victimhood. So this we are going to see now going back to Palestinians, which of course they're going to do the same thing, and we can see very similar results in the years to come. So it is going to be, you know, moving this victimhood to another nation, and, you know, playing around it, because this victimhood is being understood as something that is very beneficial, that you can actually trade and get certain privileges in international and global and local arenas, budgets, getting into different organizations. Again, I understand this is very cold of me to talk about those issues when real lives are at stake, but this is what is happening in the backstage of you know, including activism and protests and everything. So I'm here very pragmatic, or I'm talking about this only from sociological lenses. Finally, okay, inequalities. I think this is brilliant how you managed to pinpoint this idea, who has the right to talk. But we see that also with our research. Oh, you cannot do this research because you're not from there, because you don't speak. So what is enough? When are you enough? Or who can say, actually, you know, so we can give endless examples. You cannot talk about it because you are not part of it, etc., etc. So this is very, very interesting. And again, it is very much linked to this idea of human rights, how human rights conceptualizes victims. And just to be sure that historically speaking, the intentions to bring the voices of victims up to you know, to the main stage is completely correct. But with the outcome and the consequences of focusing and giving, you know, making this category as the most deserving or the most desirable category has very terrible, I would say, consequences. And your first question, you know, what are now alternatives? I think, again, human rights, I really believe, is the best possible option that we have. But to entangle it, or we need to actually, to, you know, to how we want to say it, to deconstruct it, to be able to construct it again. What all the, you know, like to go back and to trace what are all the flaws that we unintentionally are making during this process, and to start an open and honest discussion, you know, how to reconstruct it, and what is those presumptions that are valid and that can actually bring some positive change. Again, that is very normative, and I'm trying to keep myself out of this saying what yes or no, but generally I think that we need to go back to the beginning and start again this whole conversation because I think this actually exploded. As you say, Argentina and Germany and everything that is happening now, it is like so just exposing how the whole idea of the Holocaust as an educational project of human rights has failed in many ways, because you cannot hold it like this and protect it and not letting other groups to talk. So it is also something that is exposing many flaws. But I will finish that now. Thank you.
Thank you for amazing questions and for really amazing discussing the book. And thank you for those elaborate answers. Now, we still have some time, and I would like to open the floor to all other participants. You can feel free to raise a hand or write a question in the chat room. And here I already see one question by Sandra Montoya. Thank you, Lea, for your thought-provoking research and insights. I wonder, after brilliantly unpacking the presumptions in human rights ideology system in terms of preserving life and dignity, what would be the alternative? Lea, do you also read the question in the chat room?
Okay, here is the thing. Dignity is a very nice concept, but it is very not clear when you say dignity. And we often, especially in human rights discourse, we see, people are talking about dignity as who is supposed to give that dignity? What do we mean by that? So this is kind of a way in which we want to distinguish ourselves as human beings from, I don't know, probably animal world or something that we understand as lower than we are. But dignity actually doesn't mean much. So there are, as you probably know, some kind of aspects that are very concrete when we talk about dignity. For example, there is a very clear agenda within the human rights that after mass atrocities, bodies should be recovered and their identity should be, realized through DNA methods, forensic, etc. This is for the sake of dignity, because otherwise you don't need to understand why do we need that. Okay, so there is a dead body, so there is this need comes from people who are actually saying, I need to know who is buried there and where is someone that I'm missing. I would not know to say what would be the alternative to that. Yeah, I don't want to get into it much more. I think there are some aspects that are more tangible, but 80% of this concept of dignity, I think, is more as rhetorics that is very much used within the human rights discourse, and it is not actually effective on the ground.
Thank you. We'll proceed with the next question by Neringa Kumbita. Could you please elaborate why the Holocaust Remembrance is a failed project?
Oh, that's a big discussion. I think that we just before everything happened, the last round of Israel and Gaza, I think the hopes of the Holocaust project as the main educational tool to bring, to fight racism and to bring human rights and to bring democracy, so much was put on the shoulders of human rights. And there is a vast plethora of projects and literature that actually contributed. And it was wonderful. I mean, the effort is amazing. But why I think it is a failed project? because the sources or how historically we see this the project of human rights of Holocaust developed, we see those sources first of all in Germany. There is a great book by Sarah Jones that shows actually how those networks are working and how it becomes part of a global agenda. With Germany collapsing in a sense that is not implementing Holocaust as human rights right now in Germany, to actually include different voices as part of the lesson learned of human rights, or such like as human rights, we see that is part of a collapse. Secondly, the so much focus on the Holocaust as the main event, global event in the history, because we, of course, we know that there are many other events that are not getting that kind of a focus. So it is very Eurocentric project, excluded so many other stories and narratives, starting from slavery and I don't know, abuses, different kind of colonialism, etc. Those stories were never reflected, and we can see, for example, in different museums around the globe that focus on human rights, on Holocaust, but exclude something that is locally much more important. So in that sense, we see that Holocaust as human rights is again some kind of abstraction, but it is not including other, other injustices, and this is exploding right now. So we see how this cannot hold the water. So that's my opinion on that.
Thank you. Next question. How can we instill more complexity and messiness without falling into a relativistic stance? Seeing everything as flat interaction leads to relativization.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. I think that's a good one, especially in what is happening now, because now, especially with the Israel-Palestine, there is no place for complexity. If you say anything that is slightly understood as being complex, it means you're normalizing situation. You're already put in some kind of this side on that side. I don't see there is actually, I'm not very optimistic about that, because there are other forces that are in place now, and now I think more about modernity, and I think about neoliberalism, and I think that all those forces are actually forcing us to always keep the simplest version of events as it is happening, because we are too much consumed in so many different things that we don't have space actually to be consumed in something that is more complex. So in that sense, I think the whole world is going to this nice shallowness, that everything has to be, very much short format, Instagram, yes, no, just to make it very brief and very short. And also, temporally speaking, it has the effect of 1 second. That's completely different subject attempt of writing about it now. So yeah, I think that we cannot, there is no space for complexities now. Okay,
another question, not easier one. What do you think about memory activism and solidarity, activism from below?
I think it is wonderful. My problem with activism is the following. I think that many activists don't understand actually, and take, not just activists, I mean the people who are working in NGOs, people don't understand actually that those presumptions that dictate the way they actually promote content of the human rights memorialization agenda are actually not working. So it is like, you're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, but at the end of the day, I see that most of those things are bringing to something that is opposite, not desired results. Again, I've been attacked about it before, but I just want to say very clearly that my position here is being a researcher and sociologist. I have very different agenda than someone who is activist. I think we have just different universes in which we operate. Yeah, that's what I can say about that.
Next. Sometimes the colonial critique might create proper memorialization and remembrance frame of particular events for people for specific ethnicities. Decolonization, not based on social movements, might also shape idea of ancestors being pure victims. How can decolonial critique and memory studies go hand in hand and fight for all human rights?
I don't believe in that. In a way that I think that part of this victimhood narrative and historical injustice that we see now is a process of identity politics. And I think that on the one hand, identity politics did so much good, because for the first time we could see actually different groups that were not represented. But on the other hand, now you have every single group that is fighting actually to get this kind of representation. But sociologically speaking, you always, to get representation, you always need to marginalize someone else. You always have margins. So identity politics in their root are about inequality, where you want to, climb the ladder and to leave someone else in the dark. This is how it works. You can say we can have solidarities. I can talk also about that. Like, so we can talk about BDS and the group before this, the groups that were under this umbrella. Many different agendas. Many different agendas that just wanted to have this transparency, because of course, when you have a bigger representation, you have a bigger visibility. But they have many different agendas there. So it doesn't mean, that they're fighting on the same umbrella, but not for the same things. So this is important to understand. Again, I'm pessimistic.
I think the next question is closely related to what you started talking about. Is the problem the concept of victimhood as such, which appears in real context, certainly even with its ambiguities, or the problem is the appropriation of the concept by ethno-nationalism? And how does this translate beyond ethno-nationality, for example, race or gender? Let's think of hashtag not all men or similar. Think of Rothberg's concept of implicated subjects directly profiting from structural inequalities.
Okay, so victimhood per se is not a novel phenomena. Also, when you look into nationalism and nationalist narratives, you will see victimhood. That is a famous trope, and just with the human rights memorialization agenda that added more value to this concept. So, if once you had only nationalists fighting for that, now you have everyone fighting for this label. And part of it is that it gives something that makes a group or a person unique. And if you have that and other groups have that, so it values less. So sociologically speaking, you need to be unique in that to have that label, for that label to be worth something, and everything, what we see today is cheapening that process. Of course, nation state has much to do with this, and I've wrote about it, how actually nation states are managing to play this victimhood politics to actually separate different victim groups and survivors to fight between themselves because they would allocate different budgets to different groups. This is the best way. That is also, you see it in Northern Ireland, not only in the Balkans, but in Israel, you also can see it. You know, you see, and then you see how different victims are trying to, you know, fight who is more ideal victim and who is more deserving victim, which is again completely. It is like with a genocide. I think that whether something is genocide or no, it is completely misplaced discussion, because for someone who lost someone, is it different if I lost someone in something that is ethnic cleansing or massacre or genocide? Is my pain going to be less? Well, that is the answer is not that simple, to be honest, but just because we have this, that if it is called genocide, it means that I will have more benefits, social benefits, symbolical benefits. And I'm not saying that in I'm saying that in very cold head, but without disrespect. Yeah.
Gruia, go ahead.
Could I just quickly go answering to Milica that I think, at least from my research, that the concept of victimhood itself is actually that brings the problem, and not appropriation by ethno-nationalism. Because the example I was giving from Argentina or Chile is that this is not a category like you mentioned, race, gender, or ethno-national identity, but category of being a victim of political violence that creates a very particular identity, and which is very politicized, and only those people have the right to speak, and they are somehow on top of the hierarchy. The mothers of Plaza de Mayo are asked what they think of the pension reform and all these things that have nothing to do with necessarily with their role, but it's because they are sacrosanct, and it's very hard to talk about them like that. I just wanted to add this to complicate it. It's not only about innate categories, but also about the legitimacy of experience of a victim that makes you
Exactly
noble.
Exactly. Not only that, it is also victimhood is always against something else. You know, if you have everyone is victims, that it makes there is no value to it. So it has to be against someone who is not, or who is something else. So this is how it works.
Okay, another question would also connect well to what you started discussing. I wonder whether another assumption that might merit unpacking is the instrumentalization of law, including human rights law, at both global and national levels. If so, and if the value of memorialization lies in the process, then perhaps we can move away from normativity towards thinking in terms of democratization of memorialization. Separately, should we think about the right to memory as a human right, particularly in light of the ever-expanding neoliberal juridification of societies?
I don't know who said that, but I completely agree. I mean,
yeah, sir.
Thank you. I think that that actually law, especially human rights law, complicates this, because it is very normative and there are so much expectations, and it's at the end it's like kind of feels like a big bluff. I mean, I remember I was watching this South Africa versus Israel first part, you know, and I was underwhelmed by the result of the whole process. So again, we put so much into the hands of law, but actually this normative, it is good to be there, but it is just very small portion of actually, what did you say, of remembering? I don't remember what is the terminology. And again, I think it is very important what you mentioned about neoliberalism, because also those memorialization projects are very much linked to neoliberalism. Even if you just go through a memory studies literature, you will see, you know, about memory entrepreneurs and currencies and trade and this and that. It's very much actually part of it. And the whole process about what victim means actually is also very much part of this system of who gets what, you know, what is being traded for what, yeah, restitution and all those things that provide you actually some tangible means actually is part of this memory narrative as we know it today. But maybe Gruia want to add something.
So the author of the question was Michaela Sarban, just to be
great.
known.
Good.
Yeah. Could you please relate your idea of moral remembering to empire or industry of trauma? Fassin, Rechtman, what do you think of this concept?
Of trauma?
Of empire or industry of trauma?
Industry of trauma. Trauma is it is also part of this you know, victimhood trauma. I also wrote a bit about it, how those Carol Kidron wrote extensively about how this whole idea and agenda of trauma, especially that is very much westernized as what trauma means to us. You know, how should we deal with trauma? If you're traumatized, it means that you need to talk about it. If you don't talk about it, silence is something that is pathological, whereas it is not a universal concept, and we see that in many different groups, depending also on their religion, understand it differently. Some will talk, some will not talk, some will do completely different things and will not understand it in the same way as we do. But yet again, it is important to see how this the focus or center of budgets is being dispersed around the globe actually to support something that is very much westernized. As a result, we have many distant people who are, you know, implementing and adopting this notion of trauma through this process of learning what trauma is. So they will, you know, the NGOs who are going to far east, and they will show them, you need to say we are victims. I'm simplifying, but you need to say, to understand that you're victims, you're going to trauma, this is how you should deal with it. So it became kind of a prescription in a way how to use that as your negotiation tool, which again, I don't say that people are not going through trauma and traumatic experiences, but the way we understand it today, it is much more based, it is completely or solely based on this European concept of what trauma is today.
Next. I find myself thinking more and more about the definition of human rights, particularly how in the moral remembrance culture you deal with, human rights are mainly civic and political. In many contexts, post-socialist, for instance, social and economic rights are both more important from the point of view of present problems and seen as unworthy in relation to the global political rights. Secondly, in relation Andrea Peta writes that the illiberal culture is very good at appropriating and reworking rhetoric and infrastructures of a global memory culture. It seems that they make it work, in particular because they are repurposing the definition of human rights. And I'd claim even towards the socioeconomic rights. Would you agree that a renewed attention to socioeconomic rights could be a way forward towards a controlled messiness in our understanding of the human rights memory nexus?
Can you tell me who said that? Because I cannot see.
Yes, it's Daria Hlevnyuk.
Okay, Daria, thank you so much. Yes. You know, there is a great book by Samuel Moyn that exactly was writing about that. How come that you have human rights that completely excluded the social rights, economic rights? They're not there. We can ask also something else. How come that memory became part of this agenda? Why memory? You know, so this is also weird. I find that this link between human rights and memory is not the best. In a way, I think that human rights, again, with all good intentions, very much simplified this issue and made it into a neoliberal project as kind of, okay, let's have this blueprint, let's have this toolkit, and then we are going to have it everywhere. It doesn't matter what is it about. Doesn't matter if we are talking about, you know, societies after genocide or society after institutional abuses or colonialism. The same toolkit will apply it. This is very much neoliberal logic. You know how you know, cut the budgets, you make savings by not being very contextual to each one of them. And yes, I do think that the way forward is actually going back to understand more about social and economic rights. And it then says, I think that socialism is the closest actually ideology to human rights, not anything else, but socialism actually has much more embedded ideas of human, of course, not in every single area, but especially if we talk about economic and social rights, socialism is the closest in that sense to human rights. And I'm very sorry that socialism is being bashed terribly. Yeah.
Maybe if I could add a
Gruia,
bit
yeah.
here with how did memory and human rights get so close together, even becoming a syntagm, as I gave the example of Latin America. Well, it's actually, of course, human rights. There were many discussions, as the discussion on genocide included, for instance, the destruction of cities and cultural heritage. The discussion of human rights included social and economic rights at the beginning, but they were kind of channeled into a liberal understanding. And if you're looking at the 70s and 80s with all these situations of dictatorships in Latin America that brought human rights with memory together, is that the discovery of people who were trying to hold the fort was that it was hard to legitimize the work of these dictatorships against socialist and communist activists as such. And they focused on the idea there were people who were tortured or disappeared. So their human rights were violated. So it was the depoliticization of their role, the way they were portrayed to the Western world. Look, you have to care about them, not because they were communists and socialists, but because they're people who are dismembered. They were women who were raped. So it was about human rights. So the violation of human rights became then the point of this depoliticized memory, and only recently there's a return to a more politicized memory. But it's interesting how they came as an argument to create empathy. This is just, at least in that case. I don't know how human rights crept in, let's say, in the European case. That might be something to discuss with the larger group. And maybe also it's a pity that people just typed and they didn't speak. We want to hear voices.
Yes, exactly.
So, last chance for voices.
Okay, we still have, I think, no more than 5 minutes left. And I will read the last question, which I think really well summarizes the whole debate. Is it easy to voice such opinions among people not active in academia?
Is it easy to voice such opinions in people with people active in academia?
Not active in academia.
But I want to start, is it easy for people who are active in academia? Well, such voices, I presume you're thinking about voices that or opinions that I put here. I don't know. I've been attacked outside of academia, not once or not twice, but I would love to have this possibility to open up this. I think I would be able to learn much from their point of view, especially here. I think about the activist side of this story. But often it feels like I think they feel that they are being attacked, which I never mean to do that. But it is not also always easy in academia. So I don't know. I'm always slightly fearful how things will end up, and especially, so yeah, it's like a mixed bag for me.
And if I could add, I mean, Lea talks about the proper way of remembrance, but we can also talk both in academia, but also in activist circles, of proper ways of talking about remembrance. And this is also, and I'm not only talking about Germany, and I work at a German institution, so the discussions about what can be said are very burning at the moment.
Yeah.
They happen in corridors, not in classrooms. So, but it's also what is accepted, and this is a limit both what we can talk about in academia, but also with activists. I think with the general public, often you can find way more candid discussions. Sometimes you are shocked also by the horrible things you hear. But anyway, I think that's maybe somehow still a forum of hearing things that in more controlled environments you cannot anymore.
Yeah, I think that there is we are now, especially in this different segments, there is very much policing involved. What can you say, what you're not allowed to say, especially if we talk about Israel and Palestine, for example, about Germany currently. So there are many aspects about colonialism, post-colonialism, gender. There are many issues that are very much being policed, and that's never healthy for academia, that's for sure.
On that minor note, thank you very much for amazing discussion and for answering to so many questions. Thank you for joining us for this interesting debate, and go ahead and read the book. I wish you a nice evening, and yep, that's how it looks like. I wish you a nice. Oh, okay, perfect. So have a nice evening and see you in next seminars in autumn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for organizing this.
Gruia and everyone, thank you so much for your questions. I really didn't expect that we will stay for the whole hour and a half. I really appreciate. You're always welcome to contact me directly.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.